My name is Amanda Miller, and I am 32 years old. When our parents died unexpectedly, I was 19 and my brother Ethan was 17. I made a choice that would define the next decade of my life. Postponing my education and dreams to put my brother through college and medical school. Working 3 jobs, taking out loans, and living in poverty became my normal. I never expected gratitude, but I certainly never expected contempt. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to see more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Growing up in Oak Ridge, Michigan, Ethan and I were inseparable despite our 2-year age difference. We were raised in a loving middle-class home with parents who worked hard to give us everything they could afford. Dad was a high school math teacher and Mom managed the local library. They weren't wealthy, but they emphasized education and made sure we had what we needed. Our house was modest, but always filled with books, laughter, and the smell of Mom's famous apple pie on Sundays. Ethan was always the brilliant one. By age 10, he was reading medical journals and talking about becoming a doctor. I was more of a creative spirit, interested in literature and art, though I did well enough in school. I had dreams of becoming a writer or perhaps teaching literature someday. We complemented each other perfectly. He was analytical and focused, while I was imaginative and spontaneous. Our parents supported both our dreams equally. "You both have such bright futures ahead," Mom would say, while Dad nodded in agreement. They started college funds for us, though they were modest. The plan was that scholarships and part-time jobs would fill the gaps. Everything changed on a rainy October night during my first semester at community college. I was 19, just starting to find my footing as an adult, taking English and psychology classes while working part-time at the campus bookstore. Ethan was 17, a high school senior with multiple universities already expressing interest in him. The police officer at my door looked uncomfortable in his uniform, shifting his weight as he delivered the news that would shatter our world. There was an accident on Highway 23. Your parents' car hydroplaned into oncoming traffic. The words felt like they were being spoken underwater, distorted and impossible to fully comprehend. "I am very sorry, but they both died at the scene." The funeral passed in a blur of black clothes and casseroles dropped off by neighbors. Ethan was silent throughout, his face a mask of shock. I remember holding his hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. We were orphans now, with only each other to rely on. The financial reality hit soon after. There was some life insurance money, but after paying for the funeral and the remainder of the mortgage, it wasn't nearly enough for both our educations. Our parents will name me as Ethan's guardian since I was over 18. And suddenly I was responsible for a grieving teenager while barely an adult myself. The night before we had to clear out our childhood home, I found Ethan sitting on his bed, surrounded by college brochures and scholarship applications. "What if I just don't go?" he said, his voice cracking. "I could get a job too, help with bills." Looking at him, with his brilliant mind and so much potential, I made a decision that would alter the course of both our lives. "No," I said firmly. "You're going to college. You're going to become a doctor, just like you always planned." "But how? We can't afford it anymore." I took a deep breath. "I'll make it work. I'll postpone my classes for a bit, pick up more hours at work." "But what about your dreams?" he asked, tears in his eyes. "Just delayed, not forgotten," I assured him. Though even then I suspected the truth would be more complicated. The next week, I dropped all my classes at community college. The registrar looked concerned when I explained why. "You could take just 1 class per semester," she suggested kindly. "Keep your foot in the door." "Maybe next semester," I replied, knowing it probably wouldn't happen. I picked up a full-time waitressing job at Denny's, working the overnight shift because it paid slightly better. Within a month, I added a second job at Target during the day. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. We moved from our family home to a tiny two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town. The walls were thin, the plumbing unreliable, but it was what we could afford. I gave Ethan the larger bedroom so he would have space to study. Every evening, after my shift at Target and before heading to Denny's, I would help Ethan with college applications. His grades were exceptional, and his SAT scores put him in the top percentile nationally. I was so proud when the acceptance letters started arriving, especially the one from University of Michigan with a partial scholarship. Mom and Dad would be so proud, I told him as we celebrated with a cheap bottle of sparkling cider. I couldn't have done it without you, he said, hugging me tightly. When I dropped him off at his freshman dorm, I fought back tears. Not just of pride, but of a quiet grief for the life I had put on pause. As I drove back to our empty apartment to get ready for my night shift, I was 20 years old and already feeling the weight of the years ahead. It's temporary, I told myself. Once he graduates, it will be my turn. I had no idea then how long temporary would turn out to be, or how completely my sacrifice would be taken for granted. The next 4 years passed in a blur of double shifts, instant noodles, and rare phone calls from Ethan. Each semester brought new textbooks to pay for, housing costs, meal plans, and the occasional emergency when his laptop broke or he needed unexpected dental work. The partial scholarship helped, but it didn't come close to covering everything. I started noticing the physical toll around year 2. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes. I caught every cold that went around because my immune system was compromised from lack of sleep. My manager at Denny's, Patty, started leaving vitamins by the time clock for me. "You're running yourself into the ground, honey," she said one night as I arrived looking particularly exhausted. "Just until my brother graduates," I would reply, the words becoming my mantra. My 24th birthday fell on a Tuesday. I worked a morning shift at Target, an afternoon shift covering for a coworker at a local coffee shop I'd recently started at for extra income, and then headed straight to Denny's for the overnight. I bought myself a cupcake from the gas station on my break and stuck a match in it instead of a candle. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered in the empty break room at 3 a.m. Ethan called the next day. "Sorry I forgot your birthday," he said, the sounds of a party evident in the background. "Things are crazy here with midterms." "It's fine," I said automatically. "How are your classes going?" As he launched into stories about his brilliant professors and fascinating labs, I felt a twinge of something I didn't want to acknowledge. It wasn't quite jealousy. I was genuinely happy for him, but perhaps envy mixed with resentment. While I was aging prematurely from stress, he was living the college experience I had dreamed of. I tried taking online classes that year, squeezing in coursework during my breaks or the precious few hours between shifts. After falling asleep multiple times while trying to complete assignments, I had to drop the classes, losing the tuition money I had scraped together. Ethan's visits home became less frequent. When he did visit, he spent most of the time texting friends from school or complaining about how small our apartment was. His language started to change too, peppered with medical terminology and references to things I knew nothing about. During his junior year, he brought home a friend for Thanksgiving, Jason, whose family lived overseas. I spent what little savings I had to make a proper holiday meal, even taking a rare day off work. "This apartment is pretty basic." I overheard Jason comment when they thought I was still at the store. "Yeah, my sister never really got her act together after our parents died," Ethan replied. "But it's just temporary until I finish med school." I stood frozen in the hallway, grocery bags heavy in my arms, as he continued, "At least it's cheap. She pays for everything so I can focus on my studies." The casual dismissal of my sacrifice stung, but I pushed the feeling down. He was young, I reasoned. He didn't fully understand adult responsibilities yet. When Ethan was accepted to medical school, again at University of Michigan, I felt both immense pride and creeping dread. For more years of grueling work stretched ahead of me. I was 24 and would be 28 by the time he finished. My own dreams felt increasingly distant, like stars fading with the dawn. I got into med school, he announced over the phone, his voice jubilant. That's amazing. I knew you could do it, I replied genuinely, even as I mentally calculated how many more extra shifts I would need to take on. There's just one thing, he said, his voice dropping slightly. The scholarship doesn't cover nearly enough. And medical school is really expensive. That night, I found myself at the kitchen table with loan applications spread before me. My credit was good, I had been careful about that despite our limited means, and I qualified to take out significant private student loans. I signed my name on multiple dotted lines, legally binding myself to decades of debt for my brother's dream. In his second year of medical school, I finally visited him in Ann Arbor. I had saved for months to afford the time off and the bus ticket. His apartment was beautiful, far nicer than ours back home. How do you afford this place? I asked, taking in the modern furnishings and spacious rooms. Student housing, he said vaguely. I would later discover he had opted for luxury student apartments rather than the basic dorms that would have cost much less. That evening, he introduced me to his new girlfriend, Catherine. She was beautiful, polished, and clearly from money. Her cashmere sweater probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. So you're the sister, she said, looking me over with barely concealed judgment. My discount store clothes and work-roughened hands clearly marked me as being from a different world than the one Ethan now inhabited. Amanda's been amazing, Ethan said, though his tone suggested he was defending me rather than praising me. She put her life on hold after our parents died. How selfless, Catherine replied with a thin smile. Later that night, at a restaurant I couldn't afford but was too proud to admit it, Catherine talked about her family's summer home in Martha's Vineyard and her plans to join her father's medical practice after residency. What about you, Amanda? Any plans to go back to school? She asked between sips of expensive wine. Before I could answer, Ethan jumped in. Amanda's still figuring things out. Not everyone is cut out for higher education. The casual dismissal left me speechless. In that moment, I realized how completely he had rewritten our story in his mind. No longer was I the sister who sacrificed everything for his dreams. I had become someone who simply lacked ambition or ability. By the time I turned 28, my health was deteriorating noticeably. I developed chronic migraines from sleep deprivation. My back constantly ached from years of waitressing. I had moved to an even smaller studio apartment to cut costs. As Ethan's medical school expenses mounted, each month I sent him money for rent, food, books, and spending money. The student loans were all in my name, with payments that would eventually come due. I had taken on a third job doing data entry from home during what should have been sleeping hours. My social life was non-existent. Friends from high school had long since stopped inviting me to gatherings I could never attend. My world had shrunk to the space between my various workplaces and my tiny apartment. And through it all, the calls from Ethan grew shorter and less frequent. When we did speak, he talked about his brilliant professors, his challenging rotations, his girlfriend's family connections. Never once did he ask about my life or acknowledge the mountain of debt I was accumulating on his behalf. The distance between us grew in ways that couldn't be measured in miles. We had become strangers, connected by blood and financial obligation, but little else. And still, I told myself it would all be worth it when he finally graduated and could stand on his own. I had no idea that the true breaking point was still to come, a moment that would shatter any illusions I still harbored about my brother's gratitude or our future relationship. Ethan was 28 and had just finished medical school when the embossed invitation arrived in my mailbox. He and Catherine were engaged, and her parents were hosting an extravagant engagement party at their mansion in Grosse Pointe, one of Michigan's wealthiest areas. By then, I was 30 years old, though I often caught my reflection and saw someone much older staring back. Years of stress, minimal sleep, and poor nutrition had taken their toll. My once vibrant auburn hair had dulled and was streaked with premature gray. Deep lines had formed around my eyes and mouth. I had gained weight from years of grabbing quick, unhealthy meals between shifts. The invitations specified formal attire, which sent me into a panic. My wardrobe consisted mainly of work uniforms and basic casual clothes. After setting aside money for Ethan's graduation gift, a nice watch I could barely afford, I visited a secondhand store and found a simple black dress that was only slightly outdated. "You look lovely," said the elderly shop owner, noticing my critical examination in the mirror. "Special occasion?" "My brother's engagement party," I replied, trying to sound excited rather than anxious. "He must be very proud to have you there." I smiled tightly, wondering if that was true anymore. The night of the party, I drove my 14-year-old Honda with the check engine light permanently illuminated to the address on the invitation. The house, more accurately described as a mansion, was lit up like a Christmas display, with luxury cars lining the circular driveway. A valet approached my car, then tried to hide his wince at its condition. "Will you be parking this yourself, ma'am?" he asked delicately. "I can," I said, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Inside, the opulence was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, floral arrangements that must have cost thousands, waitstaff circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I clutched my small gift bag, suddenly aware of how inadequate the watch would seem in this setting. I spotted Ethan across the room, handsome in an expensive suit, his arm around Catherine. He looked different, polished, confident, completely at home in this world of wealth and privilege. It took him several minutes to notice me standing awkwardly near the entrance. "Amanda," he finally called, waving me over. "You made it." His hug was brief, perfunctory. Catherine air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to actually make contact. "So glad you could come," she said with practiced charm. "My parents have been dying to meet Ethan's family." The introduction to Catherine's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Reynolds, was equally uncomfortable. They assessed me with the clinical detachment of people evaluating an unexpectedly subpar purchase. "Ethan tells us you've been so supportive of his education," Mrs. Reynolds said. "It must be wonderful having a doctor in the family now." "I'm very proud of him," I replied honestly, though I felt increasingly out of place. As the evening progressed, I found myself alone more often than not, nursing a single glass of champagne while Ethan circulated among the guests. I overheard snippets of conversation about vacation homes, exclusive clubs, and private schools for future children. Around midnight, I was standing near a large floral arrangement, trying to be inconspicuous, when I overheard Ethan's voice from the adjacent room. He was speaking with Catherine's father and another older man who I had learned was the chief of surgery at the prestigious hospital where Ethan would be doing his residency. "Ethan has overcome quite a difficult background," Dr. Reynolds was saying. "Shows remarkable character." "It wasn't that difficult," Ethan replied quickly. "My parents were educators. We were very middle class." "Still, losing your parents so young, having to rely on your sister," the other man commented. Ethan's laugh had an edge I'd never heard before. "Amanda did what any sister would do. Though between us, she hasn't done much with her own life. Still working the same dead-end jobs, never finished school." I felt my heart rate accelerate, blood rushing in my ears. "Some people just lack ambition," Dr. Reynolds agreed. "Fortunate that the talent in the family went to the one who could use it properly." I must have made a sound, because all three men turned toward the doorway where I stood, the gift bag now crushed in my white-knuckled grip. "Amanda," Ethan said, his expression flickering between surprise and annoyance. "We were just talking about the residency program." "I heard what you were talking about," I said quietly. Uncomfortable silence fell. The chief surgeon muttered something about finding his wife and quickly exited. Dr. Reynolds clapped Ethan on the shoulder. I'll leave you two to talk, he said, though his expression clearly communicated that Ethan should handle the situation quickly and return to more important guests. When we were alone, I finally asked the question that had been weighing on me for years. Ethan, I need to know your plans for repaying the loans. Now that you're starting residency and will be earning a salary, we should discuss a timeline. His expression changed from annoyance to disbelief. Repaying the loans? Those were your contribution to my education. My contribution? Ethan, those loans are in my name. They total over $100,000. I've already paid for your undergraduate degree out of pocket. He straightened his tie, not meeting my eyes. Amanda, I'm starting a life with Catherine. We're planning to buy a house in her parents' neighborhood. I'll be making a residence salary, which isn't much. I can't be associated with your financial problems right now. My financial problems? I repeated, stunned. These are loans I took out for your medical school. You promised you would repay them once you were working. His face hardened. I never promised anything. You offered to help me, and I accepted. That's what family does. I put my entire life on hold for you. 11 years, Ethan. Everything I've done has been to support your dreams. His expression shifted to something worse than anger, pity mixed with contempt. And that was your choice, he said coldly. Maybe if you weren't such a pathetic spinster focused on my life, you'd have your own by now. I physically recoiled as if he had slapped me. In the doorway behind him, Catherine stood with a small smirk on her perfect lips, clearly having heard everything. Ethan, she called sweetly. My parents are looking for us. The photographer wants family pictures. Her emphasis on family made it clear I wasn't included. He turned without another word, taking Catherine's arm and rejoining the party as if our conversation had never happened. I don't remember leaving the mansion or driving home. The next thing I clearly recall is sitting on the floor of my tiny apartment, still in the second-hand dress, staring at the wall until dawn broke. 11 years of my life. My youth, my education, my health, my financial security, all sacrificed for someone who saw me as nothing more than a pathetic spinster. The watch I had scrimped and saved to buy him sat unopened in its crushed gift bag beside me. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel the full weight of what I had given up and the bitter reality of how little it was valued. I cried until no more tears would come, purging years of suppressed resentment and grief. When the morning light filtered through my thin curtains, something had changed inside me. The devotion that had driven me for over a decade had hardened into something else, a determination to reclaim what was left of my life, whatever it took. The morning after the engagement party, I called in sick to all 3 of my jobs, something I had never done before. My body felt weighted with exhaustion, but my mind was unusually clear. Ethan's cruel words kept replaying, but instead of breaking me further, they were galvanizing something inside me. My neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, knocked around noon, concerned when she saw my car in the parking lot on a weekday. "Are you sick, Amanda?" she asked, her kind face creased with worry. "Not physically," I admitted, "but I think I'm finally getting better." Her confusion at my cryptic response faded when I briefly explained what had happened. She nodded knowingly. My cousin went through something similar with her younger brother. She might know someone who can help. Let me make a call. That afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Rachel Winters, a financial advisor at a small local firm. Mrs. Garcia's cousin had called in a favor to get me a same-day appointment. "So," Rachel said after I had explained my situation, "let's get a clear picture of exactly what you've done for your brother financially." Over the next 2 hours, we meticulously documented everything. The cash payments throughout his undergraduate years, the student loans for medical school, the credit cards I had opened to cover his expenses, even the costs of moving him to and from school each year. Rachel's expression grew increasingly concerned as the numbers mounted. When we reached the final tally, she sat back in her chair. "Amanda, Do you realize you've spent or committed to over $200,000 on your brother's education? Seeing the number written out made me feel slightly dizzy. Is that including the interest on the loans? No, that's just principal. With interest. These loans will likely cost you close to $300,000 over their lifetime if you're making minimum payments. She studied me carefully. You mentioned he's starting a medical residency soon. What arrangements have you made for him to take over these payments? That's the problem, I said quietly. He doesn't believe he needs to repay any of it. He says it was my gift to him. Rachel's professional demeanor cracked slightly. That's not how financial support works, especially at this magnitude. Do you have any documentation of your agreement? Emails, texts, anything where he acknowledged these were loans? I pulled out my phone and showed her several text exchanges over the years where Ethan had thanked me for loaning him money for various expenses, promising to pay me back someday. I also had the original loan applications where I had noted they were for brother's medical education. This is a start, Rachel said, making copies. Not ideal. But it establishes a pattern. Amanda, I don't typically say this to clients, but you might need to consider legal action. The thought made my stomach clench. Sue my own brother? Consider what he's done, she said gently. He's potentially saddled you with debt that will follow you into retirement after you sacrificed your own education and career for him. Sometimes family takes advantage precisely because they know you won't fight back. She handed me the business card of a lawyer, Mark Taylor. Mark specializes in family financial disputes. At least talk to him before you make any decisions. I left Rachel's office with a folder full of financial projections, loan statements, and a clearer understanding of just how thoroughly I had compromised my own future. 2 days later, I sat in Mark Taylor's modest office. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s. With kind eyes behind stylish glasses, he reviewed the documentation Rachel had helped me compile. This is actually more substantial than many cases I see, he said. Those text messages help establish that these were understood to be loans, not gifts. Is it enough to win if I take him to court? I asked. Possibly. But litigation is expensive and emotionally draining. Before we go that route, I suggest we explore other options. He leaned forward. Tell me, does your brother have any assets that might help satisfy this debt? I thought about it. Not that I know of. He's just starting his residency. Though, a memory surfaced. Our grandparents set up small trust funds for both of us. They weren't large, maybe $20,000 each. I used mine for living expenses years ago, but Ethan never touched his. I'm actually a co-signatory on the account, though he's the primary. Mark's expression sharpened with interest. That could be significant. If you're a legal signatory, we may have leverage without even going to court. Do you have the trust document? After another hour of discussion, we outlined a strategy. First, I would send Ethan a formal letter requesting repayment of the loans, clearly itemizing all expenses and the terms I was proposing. If he refused, we would petition for control of the trust fund as partial repayment and prepare for potential legal action for the remainder. Won't he just empty the trust account once he gets my letter? I asked. We'll file a temporary freeze on the account the same day the letter goes out, Mark explained. He won't be able to touch it until this is resolved one way or another. The thought of confronting Ethan so directly terrified me. For 11 years, I had built my identity around supporting him, putting his needs first. The idea of standing up to him felt like violating some fundamental law of nature. But as I looked around at Mark's office, I noticed a small plaque on his desk. Your self-worth is not determined by your usefulness to others. Is something wrong? Mark asked, noticing my fixation on the plaque. No, I said, making my decision. Let's draft the letter. That evening, I crafted a careful email to Ethan, asking to meet for coffee to smooth things over. I made it sound like I wanted to apologize for overreacting at the engagement party. His response came quickly, clearly relieved that I was backing down. He suggested a cafe near his new apartment the following Saturday. The letter arrived at his apartment by certified mail on Friday, requiring his signature for delivery. My phone exploded with texts and calls immediately afterward, all of which I ignored as Mark had advised. Saturday morning, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a quiet corner table. I brought a small recording device, which Mark had assured me was legal in Michigan as long as one party to the conversation consented. I also brought a complete copy of all documentation. When Ethan stormed in 20 minutes late, his face was flushed with anger. He threw the letter onto the table as he sat down. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, loud enough that nearby patrons turned to look. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the practiced opening Mark and I had rehearsed. "I thought we should discuss this civilly before moving forward with legal options." "Legal options," he scoffed. "Amanda, this is ridiculous. You can't see your own brother. What would Mom and Dad think?" The mention of our parents sent a flash of anger through me, but I kept my voice steady. "I think they would expect their son to honor his obligations and not take advantage of his sister's sacrifice." He leaned back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, I appreciate what you did. Of course I do. But it was your choice to help me. I never forced you." "You're right," I acknowledged. "It was my choice, made out of love and a promise to our parents. But that doesn't make it a gift with no expectation of repayment." "You knew these were loans, Ethan. You've referred to them as loans in dozens of texts over the years." His expression hardened. "I was a kid. I didn't understand the financial implications." "You were old enough to understand when you were in medical school," I countered, opening the folder and sliding several printed text messages across the table. "Here you specifically thank me for loaning you money for your board exam fees and promise to pay me back with interest once you're a rich doctor." He barely glanced at the evidence. "This would never hold up in court. My lawyer thinks differently." I kept my voice calm despite my racing heart. "But I'd rather not go to court at all. That's why I'm proposing a reasonable repayment plan, starting with the money in Grandma's trust fund." His head snapped up. "How do you know about that?" "I'm a co-signatory, Ethan." I've always known about it. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "You can't touch that money. It's mine. Actually, legally, we both have access to it. I've never tried to use it because I respected that Grandma intended it primarily for you. But given the circumstances, I think using it to repay some of your debt to me is reasonable." His expression darkened. "If you do this, you'll destroy our relationship. Everyone we know will take my side. All our family friends. Our extended family. I'll make sure they know how you're betraying me." I reached into my purse and placed the small recorder on the table. "Including how you called me a pathetic spinster for sacrificing my life to put you through school? Should I play that part for them?" His face paled. "You're recording this?" "Michigan is a one-party consent state," I said quietly. "And I've been recording a lot of things lately, including our conversation at the engagement party." For a moment, Ethan looked truly shaken. Then his expression hardened into something I didn't recognize, a stranger wearing my brother's face. "You've changed," he said accusingly. "Yes," I agreed. "I finally have." He stood abruptly. "I need to consult my own lawyer. This conversation is over." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Ethan." He paused but didn't turn around. "I loved you enough to give up everything for you. All I'm asking is for you to acknowledge that sacrifice and make it right." His shoulders tensed, but he walked out without another word. On the drive home, I experienced a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in 11 years, I had stood up for myself, named my worth, and demanded respect. Whatever happened next, something fundamental had shifted inside me. That night, I received a call from Rachel, checking how the meeting had gone. When I described Ethan's reaction, she sighed. "People rarely give up privilege without a fight," she said wisely. But you've taken the first step, and that's often the hardest part. What if he's right? What if everyone does take his side? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Then they aren't people worth having in your life, she replied simply. Amanda, you deserve to be valued for who you are, not just what you can give to others. For the first time in years, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, as if my body recognized a burden had begun to lift. The legal wheels began turning with surprising speed. The day after my confrontation with Ethan at the cafe, Mark filed paperwork to freeze the trust fund account and formally notified Ethan of my intent to pursue legal action if a settlement couldn't be reached. 3 days later, I received a call from a lawyer named James Hoffman, whose perfectly modulated voice practically radiated expensive education and tailored suits. Ms. Miller, I represent your brother in this unfortunate matter, he began. I was hoping we might discuss this situation, like reasonable people, and avoid unnecessary legal entanglements. I'm very reasonable, I replied. That's why I offered a payment plan instead of demanding the full amount immediately. My client feels your claims are exaggerated and that you're attempting to capitalize on familial support that was freely given. I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, the ingrained response to back down, to avoid conflict, to put Ethan's feelings before my own. But Rachel's voice echoed in my mind. You deserve to be valued. Mr. Hoffman, I said steadily, I have documentation for every dollar I'm claiming. But more importantly, I have recorded conversations where my brother acknowledges these were loans and promises repayment. I believe that would be of interest to a judge. A brief silence followed. Perhaps we should meet to discuss settlement options, he finally said, his tone noticeably less dismissive. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at Mark's office. I arrived early. Stomach in knots. Mark greeted me with a reassuring smile. Remember, you have both the moral and legal high ground here, he said. Don't let them intimidate you. When Ethan arrived with his lawyer, I was shocked by his appearance. Always immaculately groomed, he now looked tired and slightly disheveled. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away. His expression unreadable. James Hoffman, as I had imagined, was impeccably dressed and exuded confidence. He placed a folder on the table and began without preamble. We've reviewed your client's claims and find them largely without merit, he stated. However, in the interest of family harmony, Dr. Miller is prepared to make a nominal payment to resolve this matter. Mark raised an eyebrow. And what would you consider nominal for over $200,000 of documented expenses and loans? $25,000, Hoffman replied smoothly. The contents of the trust fund, which we acknowledge Ms. Miller has legal access to, though we maintain it was not the grandparents' intention for it to be used this way. Mark looked at me, and I nodded slightly. We had anticipated this opening offer. That's not going to work, Mark responded. My client has documentation for every dollar she's claiming. Furthermore, we have multiple recorded conversations where Dr. Miller acknowledges these were loans to be repaid. Hoffman's expression didn't change, but Ethan shifted uncomfortably. May I hear these alleged recordings? The lawyer asked. Mark nodded and played 2 recordings, one from years earlier when Ethan had called to request money for emergency dental work, clearly stating he would pay me back once he was earning doctor money, and the more recent one from the engagement party where he had used the cruel, pathetic spinster comment. The color drained from Ethan's face at the second recording. Even his lawyer looked slightly taken aback. These recordings, while unfortunate in tone, don't constitute a legal contract, Hoffman argued, though with less conviction than before. Perhaps not alone, Mark agreed. But combined with the text messages, email exchanges, and Ms. Miller's detailed financial records, they establish a clear pattern of understanding that these were loans, not gifts. And frankly, the second recording demonstrates a level of contempt that would not serve your client well before a judge. Hoffman conferred quietly with Ethan, whose posture had become increasingly deflated. We're prepared to offer $50,000, Hoffman finally said. Payable over 5 years. I leaned toward Mark and whispered, "May I speak directly to Ethan?" After Mark nodded, I turned to my brother. "Ethan, this isn't how I wanted things between us. For 11 years, I put your dreams ahead of my own. I worked 3 jobs, ruined my health, and put my entire life on hold because I believed in you. I never expected gratitude, but I didn't expect cruelty either. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. What do you want, Amanda?" "I want what you promised, repayment of the loans that put you through school, so I can finally have a chance at my own education and future. And I want acknowledgement that what I did mattered. That it wasn't the action of a pathetic spinster, but of a sister who loved you enough to sacrifice everything." Silence fell over the room. Even Hoffman seemed uncomfortable with the raw emotion. Finally, Ethan looked up. "The trust fund only has $20,000. I can't pay back everything at once. I'm just starting residency." "I know," I said. "That's why the repayment plan I propose spreads the payments over 10 years, with minimal interest. It's far more generous than any bank would be." More whispered consultation between Ethan and his lawyer followed. Eventually, Hoffman cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to transfer the trust fund immediately as a good faith payment and commit to the 10-year repayment plan for the remainder, with 2 conditions." "What conditions?" Mark asked. "First, these proceedings remain confidential. Second, the recording from the engagement party is deleted after this meeting." I considered this. The recording had served its purpose, leveraged to get Ethan to acknowledge his debt. And I had no desire to publicly humiliate him, despite his treatment of me. "I'll agree to delete the recording," I said, "if Ethan acknowledges, in writing, that what he said was cruel and untrue." Ethan's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he nodded. Over the next hour, we hammered out the details of the agreement. The trust fund would be transferred to me immediately. Ethan would make monthly payments beginning after his first 3 months of residency. The agreement included a clause that any missed payments would result in the full amount becoming due immediately. As we concluded, Ethan finally spoke directly to me. "I never meant for things to go this way." "Neither did I replied honestly. As I left the building with Mark, a weight I had carried for 11 years felt somewhat lighter. The road ahead would still be difficult. The monthly payments from Ethan would help, but wouldn't immediately transform my financial situation. But for the first time in over a decade, I felt like I had options, and more importantly, I had stood up for my own worth. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Lynn, a regular customer at the diner where I worked. Lynn was in her 70s, a retired professor who came in every Tuesday and Thursday for breakfast and always left generous tips. "Amanda, I hope you don't mind me calling. Patty gave me your number," she began. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about your interest in returning to school." We had indeed talked briefly about my dreams of education when she'd caught me reading a borrowed literature anthology during a slow period. "I was wondering if you might be interested in a part-time position at the community college where I used to teach. The English department needs an administrative assistant, and I'm on good terms with the department chair. The pay isn't spectacular, but it comes with tuition benefits after 6 months." I found myself speechless for a moment. "Lynn, that would be amazing. But I don't have a degree." "You have life experience and obvious intelligence," she countered. "Sometimes that's more valuable. Would you be willing to interview?" "Absolutely," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." As I hung up, I realized this was the first direct result of my decision to reclaim my life. People were seeing me differently because I was finally seeing myself differently. 2 weeks later, Ethan's lawyer sent confirmation that the trust fund had been transferred to my account. Seeing that $437 in my bank account, more money than I'd had at once in over a decade, brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just money, it was possibility. That same day, I received a handwritten note from Ethan. It was brief and clearly difficult for him to write. Amanda, I'm sorry for what I said at the engagement party. It was cruel, untrue, and unworthy of the sacrifices you've made for me. I will honor our agreement. Ethan. It wasn't the heartfelt reconciliation part of me had hoped for, but it was acknowledgement, the first step toward whatever our relationship might become in the future. With the initial trust fund money, I paid off my most pressing debt and put a deposit on a slightly better apartment closer to the community college where I would soon be working. For the first time in 11 years, I allowed myself to think about what I wanted rather than what Ethan needed. And with each decision I made for myself, each boundary I established, I felt more strength returning, not just the strength to confront Ethan, but the strength to build a life that was truly mine. The months following the legal settlement brought changes I could never have anticipated. Some were painful. Catherine's parents attempted to intervene, calling me directly to suggest I was damaging Ethan's promising career with my unreasonable demands. I simply referred them to Mark and blocked their numbers. Ethan and I maintained minimal contact, limited mostly to perfunctory emails confirming his monthly payments, which to his credit, he made on time. The wall between us remained, but it was now a boundary I had chosen rather than a distance he had imposed. The most unexpected changes came from other directions. The part-time position Lynn helped me secure at Lakeside Community College proved to be a turning point. Working in an academic environment, even in an administrative capacity, reignited my love of learning in ways I hadn't anticipated. You have a natural talent for this, Dr. Winters, the department chair, commented after I helped reorganize the department's chaotic filing system. Have you considered taking classes yourself? I'm planning to start next semester, I replied. Once my tuition benefits kick in. Excellent, she said with genuine enthusiasm. Let me know if you need advice on your course selection. My new schedule allowed me to reduce my hours at Denny's to weekends only, though I kept the job for financial security. The regular customers noticed the change in me almost immediately. There's a light back in your eyes, Patty observed during a quiet moment. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I'm taking my life back, I told her with a smile. One day at a time. My improved schedule and reduced stress began to have physical effects as well. The constant exhaustion that had been my companion for years gradually eased. My chronic headaches became less frequent. I even started taking evening walks around my new neighborhood, reclaiming my health one step at a time. With the first few payments from Ethan added to my improved income situation, I was able to start a small emergency fund, something I hadn't had since our parents died. The security of having even a modest financial cushion reduced my anxiety significantly. 3 months after starting at the college, I enrolled in my first class, Introduction to American Literature. Sitting in a classroom as a student rather than cleaning it after hours felt surreal. At 31, I was older than most of my classmates, but my life experience gave me perspectives they couldn't yet imagine. Your analysis of Thoreau's Walden was quite insightful, my professor commented after I turned in my first paper, particularly your observations about the privilege inherent in his concept of self-reliance. I've had some personal experience with the limitations of that philosophy, I replied with a small smile. When I received my first A on a college paper, I framed it and hung it on my wall, a tangible reminder that my intellectual capabilities hadn't diminished during my years of sacrifice. If anything, life had given me a depth of understanding that enriched my academic work. Lynn became not just a mentor but a friend, inviting me to faculty events and introducing me to people who shared my interests. Through her, I met Rachel, a librarian who invited me to join her book club. We meet once a month, Rachel explained. Nothing fancy, just wine, snacks, and passionate arguments about literature. That sounds perfect, I said, realizing how long it had been since I'd had anything resembling a social life. The book club became a monthly highlight, introducing me to a circle of women who accepted me without judgment. Their friendships helped heal some of the isolation I had experienced for so long. 6 months into my new life, I ran into Catherine's mother at a local grocery store. In the past, I would have avoided her or felt diminished by her presence. Instead, I nodded politely and continued selecting produce. She approached after a moment's hesitation. "Amanda, I didn't expect to see you here. I live in the neighborhood now," I replied evenly. She seemed unsure how to proceed, clearly uncomfortable. "Ethan mentioned you're taking classes." "Yes. I'm working toward my degree in English literature." "That's nice." She adjusted her designer handbag nervously. "You know, we were just trying to protect Ethan's future." I placed a bunch of kale in my cart before responding. "I understand. I spent 11 years doing the same thing. The difference is, I'm now protecting my own future too." She had no response to that, and we parted with awkward nods. As I watched her walk away, I realized I no longer felt intimidated by her wealth or status. My worth wasn't determined by comparison to others, but by my own standards and choices. The most profound changes, however, were internal. Each time I made a decision based on my own needs rather than someone else's, it became easier to recognize my intrinsic value. The voice in my head that had always whispered selfish when I considered my own desires gradually quieted, replaced by a stronger voice that affirmed my right to pursue my own dreams. Near the end of my first year of transformation, I attended a gathering at the home of one of Lynn's colleagues. Many faculty members were present, including several from the English department where I worked. For the first time, I found myself in a social situation where I was known for my mind rather than my service. Amanda's paper on female sacrifice in 19th century literature was extraordinary, Dr. Winters told a small group. She has a unique perspective that brings new insight to these texts. As people turned to me with genuine interest, asking questions about my analysis, I felt a shift in how I was perceived and how I perceived myself. No longer the waitress, the caretaker, or the selfless sister, but a woman of intellect and promise. Later that evening, I overheard Lynn speaking with another professor. "She's remarkable," Lynn said. "To have put her life on hold for so long and still maintain such passion for learning. Once she finishes her degree, I'm going to encourage her to consider graduate school." "You think she has that potential?" the other professor asked. Without question, Lynn replied confidently. "She has both the intellect and the life experience to make significant contributions to the field." Their words sent a thrill through me, not just the praise, but the implication that my future held possibilities I had never dared to imagine. For so long, my horizon had extended only to Ethan's graduation. Now it stretched limitlessly before me, filled with opportunities of my own choosing. When I received notification that I had made the dean's list after my first full semester, I allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated pride. This achievement belonged entirely to me, not as someone's sister or supporter, but as Amanda Miller, student and scholar in her own right. I texted a photo of the letter to Patty, who responded with a string of celebratory emojis and "never doubted you." "When's the party?" There was a time when I would have dismissed the idea of celebrating my own achievements. Now I found myself planning a small gathering at my apartment, inviting Lynn, Rachel, my book club friends, and coworkers who had supported me. The night of the celebration. Looking around at these people who valued me for myself, I realized I had built something precious in the past year, not just an education or improved finances, but a life that reflected my own values and desires. When Ethan's monthly payment arrived the following week, I felt a subtle shift in my perception. What had once represented my sacrifice now symbolized my strength, my ability to stand up for myself and demand respect. The money was still important practically, but it no longer defined our relationship or my sense of self. I was no longer just a means to someone else's end. I had become the protagonist of my own story. One year after confronting Ethan at the cafe, I stood in my cap and gown, associate's degree in hand. At 33, I was noticeably older than most of my fellow graduates, but that difference no longer bothered me. Each line on my face, each gray hair represented a chapter in a story that had shaped me into the woman I had become. Lynn was there, beaming like a proud parent. So were Rachel, Patty, and the friends who had supported me throughout this transformative year. Their presence meant more to me than they could know, proof that family could be chosen as well as born. The ceremony itself was modest compared to Ethan's medical school graduation, but the pride I felt was immeasurable. This achievement belonged entirely to me. As we filed out of the auditorium, I spotted a familiar figure standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd. Ethan, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit, held a small gift bag. We hadn't seen each other in person since the meeting with our lawyers. Our communication had been limited to impersonal emails confirming his monthly payments, which, to his credit, had always arrived on time. I approached him with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "I didn't expect to see you here." Lynn called me, he admitted. She thought I should know. An awkward silence fell between us. So much unspoken history, so many complicated emotions. "Congratulations," he finally said, handing me the gift bag. "I know how much this means to you." Inside was a beautiful fountain pen with my name engraved on it. The gesture was thoughtful in a way I hadn't expected from the brother who had called me pathetic just a year earlier. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "It's perfect. Amanda, He hesitated, clearly struggling with what to say. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year. About us, about what you did for me, about how I treated you." I waited, giving him space to find his words. I was so focused on becoming a doctor, on fitting into Catherine's world, that I convinced myself my success was entirely my own doing. It was easier than acknowledging how much I owed you. He looked down at his polished shoes. "I'm sorry." The apology was simple but genuine, the first real acknowledgement of my sacrifice that he had offered freely, without legal pressure. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "It means a lot to hear you say it." We would never regain the closeness we had once shared. Too much had happened, too many harsh words exchanged. But perhaps we could build something new, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than sacrifice and obligation. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" he asked tentatively. "Catch up properly." "I'd like that," I replied. And I meant it. As Ethan walked away, Lynn approached. "Everything okay?" "Getting there," I said with a small smile. "One step at a time." The months that followed brought continued growth and change. With my associate's degree complete, I enrolled at the State University to pursue my bachelor's in English literature. Thanks to my academic performance, I received a scholarship that covered most of my tuition. My position at the community college expanded to full-time, providing stability and benefits I hadn't enjoyed in over a decade. For the first time since our parents died, I had health insurance that wasn't provided by the state. I moved to a comfortable one-bedroom apartment closer to the university, nothing luxurious, but clean, safe, and entirely mine. After years of denying myself even small comforts, I allowed myself to create a space that nurtured my spirit, bookshelves filled with beloved titles, a comfortable reading chair by the window, walls painted in colors that brought me joy. My health continued to improve as the chronic stress that had been my constant companion gradually eased. Regular checkups, proper nutrition, and adequate sleep, basics that had seemed impossible luxuries during my years of supporting Ethan, became normal parts of my routine. Perhaps most significantly, I began volunteer work with a local organization that supported orphaned and foster teenagers. My experience of losing parents and navigating early adulthood without guidance gave me a unique ability to connect with these young people. "You get it," 16-year-old Zoe told me after one particularly difficult session. "You don't just feel sorry for us. I've been where you are, I replied honestly. Not exactly the same circumstances, but I know what it's like to have your life plan shattered and have to figure things out alone. But you're doing great now, she observed. You went back to school and everything. It took me a long time to get here, I admitted. But that's the thing about life. It's never too late to change direction. Through this work, I found a calling that gave purpose to my painful experiences. The years I had spent putting my own dreams on hold, while difficult, had given me wisdom and compassion I might otherwise never have developed. My relationship with Ethan slowly evolved into something I hadn't anticipated. We weren't close the way we had been as children, but we established a cautious civility that occasionally revealed glimpses of genuine care. He continued to make his monthly payments without complaint, and I made a point of acknowledging each one with a brief but cordial email. When he invited me to a small dinner celebrating his completion of residency, I attended with an open mind. Catherine was polite if not warm, and her parents maintained a careful distance. But Ethan made a point of publicly thanking me for my support during his education, a small gesture that meant more than he probably realized. You could have been much harder on me, he said quietly as we stood alone for a moment. You had every right to be. That wouldn't have served either of us, I replied. I needed to stand up for myself, not punish you. He nodded thoughtfully. I think I'm only beginning to understand what you sacrificed for me. It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was progress, acknowledgement of a debt that couldn't be measured in dollars alone. In my personal life, an unexpected development occurred when Mark, the lawyer who had helped me confront Ethan, called with a question about a similar case he was handling. I remembered how articulate you were about your experience, he explained. I thought you might have insights that could help my current client. Our professional consultation gradually evolved into friendship and eventually into something more. At 34, I found myself experiencing romance without the constraints of exhaustion and financial desperation that had characterized my 20s. You're different from any woman I've dated, Mark told me one evening as we walked along the riverfront. You know exactly who you are. I had to learn the hard way, I replied with a small smile. But I wouldn't trade that knowledge now. On my 35th birthday, a day that once would have passed unmarked as I worked multiple shifts, my friends threw a surprise party. Looking around at these people who valued me for exactly who I was, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful journey that had led me here. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Lynn handed me an envelope. This came for you at the department. Inside was a letter officially accepting me into the master's program in English literature, with a teaching assistantship that would cover my tuition and provide a modest stipend. I'm going to be a student teacher, I said wonderingly, the full circle nature of the moment not lost on me. You're going to be brilliant, Lynn replied confidently. You always were. You just needed the chance to prove it. As I prepare to begin this new chapter, I often reflect on the lessons of the past few years. I learned that true love, whether familial or romantic, never requires self-destruction. I learned that establishing boundaries isn't selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to reclaim your worth and rewrite your story. To those of you watching who might be sacrificing too much of yourselves for others, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes the most unexpected blessing is being forced to finally put yourself first. The people who truly love you will adjust to your boundaries, and those who can't weren't loving you authentically to begin with. Have you ever had to reclaim your life after putting others first for too long? How did you find the courage to make that change? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and rediscovery. Remember, it's never too late to become the protagonist of your own life story.